I was sipping my morning coffee on the porch when I heard the roar of chainsaws. Looking down my driveway, I saw workers in bright vests cutting into my century-old oak trees. My land, my trees, and standing behind them with a smug grin was none other than the HOA Karen herself. She had no clue that 20 rangers were training in the woods behind my house that very morning. Let us know where you're watching from today. And if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. The morning began like any other on my ranch. With the smell of damp earth and pine drifting in from the woods, I had just poured myself a mug of black coffee and settled into my rocking chair on the porch when the sound of chainsaws shattered the silence. It wasn't the distant hum of one chainsaw either. It was a chorus, a harsh metallic growl that didn't belong here. I froze. I knew every sound on this land, every creak of wood, every gust of wind through the branches, but this was foreign, invasive. My gut clenched as I stood and scanned the tree line. Through the pale morning light, I caught a glimpse of men in bright orange vests moving around oaks at the edge of my property. I slammed my mug down on the porch railing, the coffee sloshing over them, and grabbed my old hat. The gravel crunched under my boots as I strode down the driveway. The closer I got, the clearer the scene became. 5 men, each with a chainsaw, taking aim at the trees that had stood longer than any of us had been alive. "Hey!" I roared, my voice cutting through the noise. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The men turned startled. One of them, a tall guy with a sunburned neck and a clipboard in hand, adjusted his hard hat and said, "We're with the HOA, sir. Orders to clear these trees. Safety hazard," they said. "We're just doing our job." "Safety hazard," I barked, my jaw tightening. "These trees are healthy. Those roots have been holding this ground together for over a century. My father planted some of them with his own 2 hands. Who sent you?" Before the man could answer, I heard the click of heels against the gravel, and there she was, Catch-all Karen. If arrogance had a face, it would be hers. She strutted forward in a crisp white blouse, navy blazer, and those sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. Her lips curled into a smirk the moment our eyes met. "Morning," she said, her tone dripping with fake politeness. "We're here to ensure your property complies with community standards. These trees, well, they look a little wild and unkempt." "We can't have that. People talk unkempt." I felt my blood boil. "These trees are part of the land's history. They've survived storms and droughts. And now you want to cut them because they don't look tidy enough for you." Her smirk widened. "The HOA has rules for a reason. You signed the paperwork when you bought this land. We maintain the community's appearance. If you don't comply, you'll be fined." He took a step closer, my boots grinding into the gravel. "If one more blade touches these trees, you'll be the one calling the sheriff. This is private property." She didn't flinch. "Then call them. You'll lose." The workers shifted uncomfortably, looking from me to her, unsure what to do. One of them lowered his chainsaw, but Karen shot him a glare sharp enough to slice through steel. "You heard me," she said to the crew. "Get back to work." I could feel my fists clenching. The anger was boiling just under my skin, but I didn't let it explode. Not yet, because that was when I heard it. Voices from the woods behind my house, boots thudding softly on the ground. A whistle carried through the air, followed by laughter and low conversation. I turned and saw figures moving through the trees, their silhouettes cutting through the pale sunlight. The rangers, 20 of them, in full training gear, stepping out from the forest like they were walking straight into a standoff. I'd given them permission to train on my land for a few weeks, thinking nothing of it. But right now, they looked like a wall of strength, and Karen's confidence cracked for the first time that morning. "Something wrong?" I asked her, my tone calm but sharp. Her smirk faltered as she looked past me at the rangers gathering behind me, their arms crossed, their boots planted firmly on my property. The workers froze completely. Chainsaws lowered, and for a moment all you could hear was the wind rustling the leaves. I turned to her and said, "You might want to rethink what you're about to do." The tension was thick, like a storm building on the horizon. I could tell this was just the start of something bigger. Karen might have thought she could walk all over me, but she had no idea who she was dealing with or who was standing behind me. This battle over my land had just begun. Karen's smirk returned, though I could see a flicker of unease in her eyes. She took a step forward, crossing her arms like she was the queen of the valley. The workers looked at her, waiting for the next order, their chainsaws hanging awkwardly at their sides. "Gentlemen," she said with a tone meant to sound commanding, "you have your instructions. Those trees need to come down now." I stepped between them and the oaks. My stance firm, not a single cut. "You'll have to go through me first." Karen tilted her head, letting out a sharp laugh. "You really want to stand there and pretend you're above the HOA rules? You signed the agreement when you moved here. That means you follow the same standards as everyone else. These trees violate Code Section 12, Paragraph 4. No structures, foliage, or obstacles that obstruct uniform sight lines from the road." I nearly laughed. "Obstruct sight lines. These trees are 40 FT from the road. Nobody cares about sight lines out here except you?" "Wrong," she shot back, her voice rising. "Several neighbors have complained. This neighborhood is meant to have a clean, polished look, and your property." She gestured toward my land as if it was something vile as an eyesore. The rangers, now fully gathered behind me, exchanged quiet looks. A few of them shifted their weight, folding their arms. The air was tense enough to snap. One of the workers cleared his throat. "Ma'am, maybe we should wait for proper approval. These folks don't look too happy about this." Karen whirled around and glared at him. "Are you questioning my authority? Do your job, or I'll have you replaced by lunch." The worker looked down, but his knuckles tightened on the handle of his saw. I raised my voice, letting it cut through the morning air. "Nobody here is cutting anything until I see written authorization. And even then you'll be trespassing. You step past that fence again, you're breaking the law." Karen smirked again, trying to regain her upper hand. "You think I'm scared of your threats? You can call whoever you want. The HOA board will back me up. And if you resist, we'll find you thousands of dollars. We'll take you to court if we have to." I leaned in slightly, my voice low but firm. "Karen, you have no idea what you're walking into. You think a few lines in a handbook mean you can destroy what's mine. I've lived here for years, and I know the law, so do they," I said, nodding toward the rangers. One of the rangers stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered. His voice was calm but carried authority. "Ma'am, you're about to cross a line you shouldn't. This land is under private ownership. These trees are not part of any communal property. You need to back off." Karen blinked, clearly not expecting anyone to challenge her so directly. "And who exactly are you, state-trained ranger?" he said simply. "And if you think you can walk onto someone's property and order destruction, you're mistaken. I'd advise you to stop." The workers shifted again, a few of them setting their chainsaws down. Karen's face flushed red. "This is harassment. You can't threaten me. I'll call the police." I crossed my arms and gave a small grin. "Go ahead. I'd love to explain to them why you're trespassing on my land with a crew ready to destroy my trees." She hesitated, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. I could see the conflict in her expression. She was used to people rolling over, not standing firm. One of the rangers stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Ma'am, if you're not gone in 5 minutes, we'll document this and file a report with the county sheriff. I'm sure they'll be interested in why an HOA is cutting trees on private property without permission." Karen's jaw tightened. She turned to the workers. "Fine, step back." "But this isn't over." I could feel my pulse slowing as the chainsaws went silent for good. The men backed off, looking relieved. Karen, however, wasn't done. She stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. "You think you've won something today. You have no idea how far I'll go. I'll get the HOA board on my side. We'll bury you in paperwork and fines. You'll regret ever standing in my way." I met her glare head on. "Try me. I've faced worse than you. This land means something to me. Those trees mean something to me. You want to fight? You've got one." Her lips curled into a tight line. "Then consider this your final warning." I didn't move. Neither did the rangers. She spun on her heels, muttered something under her breath, and stomped back to her car. The workers followed her, loading up their gear as her SUV roared away, kicking up dust. I turned to the rangers. "Looks like this isn't going to be the last we hear from her." The lead ranger smirked. "Good thing we're here for the week. I get the feeling she's going to need a reminder about boundaries." I took a deep breath, looking at the line of oaks, still standing tall against the morning sky. I knew this battle was far from over. Karen wasn't the kind to back down easily, and neither was I. The dust from Karen's SUV hadn't even settled before I turned to face the rangers. There were 20 of them, all standing with the kind of calm confidence you only see in people who've been through real battles. They'd been training on the far side of my ranch for days, practicing survival drills and navigation exercises. I'd offered them the land as a favor to an old friend, never thinking they'd end up being my unexpected allies. The lead ranger, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "You all right?" he asked, his tone low but solid. "Better now," I said, glancing back at the trees. "But she's not done. I know her type. She'll be back." The ranger gave a short nod. "Then we'll be ready." Something about the way he said it made me feel like I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The rangers weren't just men in uniform. They were men who understood the meaning of defending what matters. "Karen's dangerous," I continued. "Not in the usual way. But she hides behind rules and fines. If she can't win with force, she'll bury me in paperwork. She's done it before to others. Last year, she tried to find old man Jenkins for keeping a chicken coop. Called it a visual disturbance." One of the rangers let out a low whistle. "Sounds like she needs a lesson in boundaries." "Exactly," I said, feeling a surge of resolve. "I'm not letting her take 1 inch of this land." We walked back up toward the porch, the crunch of boots on gravel steady and sure. The rangers didn't say much, but I could feel their silent agreement. They'd seen enough injustice to recognize when someone was overstepping. As we reached the porch, I grabbed my phone and snapped a few pictures of the trees, the sawdust, and the tire marks left behind by the workers. "Evidence," I muttered. "If she tries to pull anything, I want proof of what went down today." The lead ranger crossed his arms, watching me. "You got legal paperwork for this property, every deed and survey map you can think of." I said, "This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. I'm not about to let a self-appointed queen with a clipboard take that away from me." He nodded approvingly. "Then we'll stand with you. She comes back. We'll make sure she knows this isn't just your fight. It's ours, too." There was something comforting about the way he said it, like I wasn't just some rancher standing alone anymore. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, I heard the sound of trucks coming up the main road again. My heart sank for a moment, thinking Karen had already returned. I stepped off the porch, hand instinctively brushing the edge of my belt. But it wasn't Karen. It was the rest of the ranger team coming in from their drills. The trucks rolled in, headlights cutting through the growing dusk. Men hopped out, their laughter and chatter filling the air. It told them what had happened. The whole ugly scene with the chainsaws and Karen's smug grin. The moment I mentioned her trying to cut down the oaks, the mood shifted. They weren't laughing anymore. "Those trees are the only shade for miles," one ranger said, shaking his head. "She's out of her mind." "She's worse than that," I replied. "She's smart. She'll find another angle to come at me. But with all of you here, maybe we can hold the line." "Count on it," another ranger said, slapping me on the shoulder. We spent the next hour talking strategy. The rangers offered to set up watch rotations near the property line. They'd been planning nighttime navigation drills anyway, so it wasn't much of a stretch for them to keep an eye on things. By the time the stars began to scatter across the dark sky, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time since this battle with the HOA began, I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing before turning in. I stood at the base of one of the oldest oaks, running my hand over its rough bark. I remembered climbing that tree when I was a boy, my father's voice calling out from the porch, telling me to hold tight and not look down. That tree had survived more than a century of storms, and I wasn't about to let a woman like Karen bring it down. I whispered quietly, almost like I was talking to my father's spirit. "They're not cutting you down. Not now, not ever." The rangers were already rolling out their gear for the night. Tents pitched in a neat line just beyond the tree line. Their presence made the land feel alive with purpose, as though every shadow was watching and ready. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't the kind of person to let things go. She'd be back. And when she returned, she'd bring more than just a crew with chainsaws. She'd bring the full weight of the HOA board and maybe even the law. And I was ready for her. The next morning, I woke with a sense of urgency burning in my chest. The rangers were already up, cooking a simple breakfast over a campfire out back, the smell of coffee and bacon wafting across the property. I joined them briefly, but my mind wasn't on food. It was on the stack of papers sitting in my old roll-top desk inside the house. If Karen wanted to fight with paperwork, I'd give her one she couldn't win. After finishing my coffee, I headed inside and dug out the folder that held every document tied to my land. Deeds, property surveys, old tax receipts from me father's time. Everything was there. I laid it all out on the table, the sunlight cutting across the pages. One document yellowed with age caught my attention. It was the original deed signed by my grandfather back in 1912. It clearly marked the boundaries of my property, including the oak grove Karen wanted to destroy. There was no gray area. No part of my land belonged to the HOA. I grabbed my phone and called Dan, my lawyer, and an old friend who'd bailed me out of legal trouble more than once. "Dan," I said as soon as he answered, "we've got a problem. HOA Karen is trying to cut down my trees." "Figures," he muttered. "That woman's been a thorn in a lot of folks' sides. What's she claiming now?" "She says the trees don't meet community standards and that they violate some kind of sightline code. She brought workers out here with chainsaws." Dan chuckled darkly. "Sightlines? That's nonsense. HOA rules don't override property deeds, especially not land that predates the HOA itself. Send me pictures of the property lines and any evidence you have of her stepping onto your land. I'll draft a cease and desist order today." I sent him the photos I'd taken the day before Karen's SUV. The workers with chainsaws, the sawdust scattered at the base of my trees. Within an hour, Dan emailed me a preliminary letter to print and post. I walked outside with the letter in hand, nailing it to the fence post nearest the oaks. The rangers gathered around, watching with interest. "What's that?" one of them asked. "Legal notice," I said with a hint of satisfaction. "If Karen sets foot on this property again, she'll be violating a formal cease and desist order. That means fines against her this time, not me." The lead ranger grinned. "Looks like the law's on your side now." "Always was," I said, patting the fence post. "But now it's in writing." We spent the rest of the day fortifying the property lines, not with weapons or anything dramatic, but with signs that left no doubt about where my land started and where the HOA's reach ended. I even dug out an old survey map, carefully marking the points with fresh paint on fence rails. Around mid-afternoon, I heard the hum of another engine coming up the road. My stomach tightened. I motioned to the rangers and they paused their drills, eyes trained on the driveway. Sure enough, it was Karen's SUV kicking up dust as it climbed toward the house. She parked with a screech of tires and got out, waving her phone like it was a weapon. "I told you this isn't over," she snapped as she approached. "You can't intimidate me with your little ranger friends." "I've spoken with the HOA board and we voted. Those trees are coming down one way or another." He stepped forward, holding the cease and desist letter between us. "Read this, Karen. It's from my lawyer. You set foot past this fence again, and you'll be the one facing fines. You're not touching these trees." She snatched the paper from my hand, scanning it with narrowed eyes. "You think this piece of paper scares me? We'll see what the county has to say about your ownership claims." I smirked. "Go ahead." "I welcome it. These deeds are older than your entire HOA. You'll lose." Her face flushed crimson, and for a moment she looked like she might explode. But then she caught sight of the rangers, 20 of them standing silent but unyielding, watching her every move. Karen huffed, tossing the paper back at me. "This isn't over," she spat, stomping back to her SUV. "Enjoy your little victory while it lasts." I watched her drive off, dust swirling in her wake. One of the rangers chuckled. "She's like a storm cloud that won't stop circling." "Yeah," I muttered, folding the letter and tucking it into my pocket. "But I've weathered worse storms." That evening, I led Dan again to update him. He was confident we had a strong case, but he warned me Karen might try to twist the narrative at the upcoming HOA meeting. "She's clever," he said. "If she can't win on paper, she'll try to win in the court of public opinion. Be ready." And I was because if Karen thought she could turn me neighbors against me, she was in for a surprise. 3 days later, I got the notice I had been expecting a summon to an HOA meeting. Karen wasn't wasting any time. She wanted a public stage where she could try to humiliate me and turn the board, and maybe even the neighbors against me. The meeting was set for a Thursday evening at the community hall on the other side of town. I decided I wasn't going alone. When I told the rangers about it over breakfast, their reactions were instant. "We'll be there," the lead ranger said firmly. "She's not going to corner you without witnesses." I nodded, grateful for their presence. "This isn't about just me anymore. She's trying to push everyone around and someone has to put a stop to it." That evening, I walked into the community hall with 5 rangers at my side. The place was already buzzing with neighbors, some whispering and pointing as I entered. At the far end of the room, Karen stood behind a long table with 3 HOA board members, a smug expression on her face. "Well, well," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look who finally decided to play by the rules." I ignored the jab and took my seat near the front. My lawyer Dan arrived shortly after carrying a briefcase stuffed with documents. The sight of him alone seemed to rattle Karen's confidence. The meeting started with the board chair, a man named Charles, who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "We're here to address a dispute concerning property maintenance and community standards," he began. "Mr. Carter, you've been accused of non-compliance regarding the trees on your property." I rose from my seat, holding up the property deed. "With all due respect, these accusations have no legal foundation. These trees are on private land outside the jurisdiction of the HOA. I have the original deed, survey maps, and photographs to prove it. Karen's crew trespassed onto my property with chainsaws, and I have witnesses to that effect." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this confrontation to get so heated. Karen stood, brushing off her blazer like she was preparing for battle. "Those trees are a safety hazard. They're too close to the road, and they lower the aesthetic of the neighborhood. The HOA has a duty to keep the area clean and uniform. If Mr. Carter refuses to comply, he'll be fined and legal action will follow." Dan cleared his throat. "Standing up, I'm Dan Morris, Mr. Carter's attorney. For the record, the HOA has no authority to dictate foliage on property that predates the HOA's formation. I have copies of county records and survey maps confirming Mr. Carter's boundaries. Any attempt to find him will result in immediate legal counteraction." Karen's smile faltered for a split second. "We'll see about that," she said, but her voice lacked the same conviction as before. From the back of the room, one of the rangers spoke up, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "I was there when her crew showed up. We saw them cross onto Mr. Carter's property without permission." "That's trespassing," another ranger added. "We've got photos and timestamps, too. If you want, we can hand them over to the sheriff." The board members exchanged uncertain glances. One of them, a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "Karen, did you have explicit permission to order work on Mr. Carter's property?" Karen hesitated. "The HOA bylaws give me authority." "No," I interrupted firmly. "The HOA bylaws give you authority over communal areas, not over private land. My property is mine. You crossed the line, and everyone in this room should know it." The room fell silent for a moment. Then a neighbor named Sam, an older man who'd lived nearby for decades, stood up. "Karen, I think you've gone too far this time. Those trees have been there since I was a boy. They're part of this land's history. We all know Carter takes good care of his property." A few others nodded and muttered in agreement. Karen's face turned crimson. "You're all blind. Those trees are ugly and dangerous. If we let one person break the rules, we'll have chaos. I'm doing this for the good of the community." Dan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "The good of the community doesn't mean trampling over property rights. The law is clear here. You can either accept that or we'll take this matter to the county court. I guarantee you, Karen, you will lose." Karen glared at me, her eyes burning with frustration, but she didn't have a comeback. "Not this time." The board chair sighed heavily and said, "I think this meeting is over. Mr. Carter, we'll review the documents your attorney provided, but for now, no action will be taken against your property." Karen stormed out of the hall, muttering under her breath. The crowd began to disperse, but I stayed back for a moment, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders. One of the rangers clapped me on the back. "You handled that well," he said. "Maybe," I replied, "but something tells me she's not done yet. That woman doesn't know how to quit." Dan gave me a look that said he agreed. "She's going to come at you from another angle. Be ready." And I would be. The morning after the HOA meeting, I woke up with the uneasy feeling that Karen wasn't done. She'd been embarrassed in front of the board and the neighbors. But people like her don't let things go. They dig in, waiting for their next chance to strike. The Rangers were already up finishing breakfast and packing gear for a new set of drills. The lead ranger, who had quietly taken charge of their camp, walked over to me. "She's going to try something else," he said, almost reading my thoughts. "People like her don't back off after a public loss." "Exactly," I replied, leaning against the porch rail, which means we stay ready. By mid-morning, the Rangers decided to step up their presence. They shifted their training area closer to the oak grove. Using the open space as part of their navigation exercises, it wasn't just about training anymore. It was about making a statement. I watched them move through the trees with quiet precision, each step purposeful when they weren't running drills. A few of them patrolled the perimeter of my property, eyes sharp, watching for trouble. Around noon, as I was mending a section of fence, one of the younger rangers jogged up to me. "Carter, you might want to take a look at this," he said, pointing toward the road. Sure enough, Karen's SUV was parked about 50 yards away, just beyond the property line. She wasn't alone this time. 2 men in suits were with her, one of them holding a camera and snapping photos of my land. I set down my tools and strode toward the fence, the rangers falling in line behind me like a silent wall. "Karen," he called out. "What are you doing?" She turned with that familiar smirk, though I could see the irritation simmering in her eyes. "Just documenting your violations," she said, waving a hand toward the trees. "You can't stop me from taking photos from the road. This is public property." One of the men in suits nodded and kept snapping pictures. I crossed my arms. "What violations? Those trees are on my land and we both know it. Whatever game you're playing, it's not going to work." Karen stepped closer, stopping just shy off the property line. "You think you won at that meeting, but the board hasn't made their final decision. I'm gathering evidence. We're going to prove you're in violation of community safety rules." The lead ranger, who had been standing behind me, stepped forward. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that made Karen falter. "Ma'am, you've already trespassed once. I suggest you keep your distance. We're documenting everything you do from this point forward." The man with the camera hesitated, lowering it slightly. "Ma'am, maybe we should keep going," Karen snapped at him. That's when the rest of the rangers moved. It wasn't aggressive, but their presence was undeniable. They spread out along the fence, arms crossed, watching Karen and her men like hawks. It was clear they weren't going to let anything happen to those trees. "Let me make this clear," I said, stepping closer to the fence. "This land is under my name. I have legal documents, and now I have witnesses who are trained to uphold the law. If you keep harassing me, Karen, I'll have no choice but to file a harassment report with the sheriff's office." Her smirk faltered. For a second, I saw the frustration flash across her face. "You think you can intimidate me with your little army?" she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. The lead ranger didn't flinch. "We're not here to intimidate anyone. We're here to ensure the law is respected. And from where I'm standing, the only one ignoring the law is you." Karen's face flushed crimson. She turned to the men in suits. "We're done here," she said curtly. They got back into the SUV, the door slamming shut. As the car drove off, one of the rangers chuckled softly. She's not used to people standing up to her. "Is she?" "No," I replied, shaking my head. "She's used to people rolling over, but not this time." We spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing our position. The rangers helped me set up cameras along the fence line, motion-triggered and capable of recording both day and night. We weren't just defending the property anymore. We were building a case piece by piece that night. As the campfire crackled, one of the rangers leaned over to me. "You know, it's not just about the trees," he said. "It's about standing up for what's right. Folks like her thrive when people stay silent." I nodded, staring into the flames. "I'm not staying silent. Not now, not ever." The firelight flickered across their faces, and for a moment I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Unity. These men who had no stake in my land were standing with me because it was the right thing to do. Karen might have power on paper, but I had something stronger: truth, law, and a group of people who believed in protecting both. By the end of that week, I could feel the tension building like a storm waiting to break. The rangers stayed close, running their drills and keeping watch. But Karen had gone quiet. Too quiet. I knew her silence didn't mean surrender. It meant planning. Saturday morning, I got a call from Dan, my lawyer. "Carter, you're going to want to hear this," he said, his tone sharper than usual. "I've been digging through the HOA's bylaws, and I found something you're going to love. Turns out Karen has been overstepping her authority for years. She's been enforcing rules that the board never officially approved." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean she's been bluffing the whole time?" "More than bluffing. Dan said she's been signing off on contracts without board votes, issuing fines that were never legally valid, and even pocketing fees for processing costs that don't exist. If we push this, she's not just going to lose her position. She could face legal consequences." For a moment, I was stunned. Karen had always acted untouchable, but this changed everything. "Can you prove it?" I asked. "I've got copies of the original bylaws and email chains from a whistleblower on the board. Karen's been playing queen, but the rest of the board's starting to turn against her. They've called for an emergency meeting tonight. I think they're planning to confront her." I couldn't help but smile. "Good. Let's Beth her." When I told the Rangers, their reactions were immediate. "We'll back you up." The lead ranger said, "If this is the end game, we want to see it." That evening, I walked into the same community hall where Karen had tried to humiliate me days earlier. This time, the atmosphere was different. Neighbors were talking quietly among themselves, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity, even excitement. Everyone had heard whispers of the board's sudden investigation. Karen stood at the front, arms crossed, visibly irritated. She gave me a glare sharp enough to cut steel, but I simply nodded and took a seat in the front row, Dan by my side, and the Rangers filling the seats behind me. The meeting began with Charles, the board chair, clearing his throat. I looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. "We're here to address concerns regarding the enforcement of HOA rules," he said, his voice measured. "Specifically, certain actions taken without board approval." Karen straightened. "Oh, for heaven's sake, this is ridiculous. We all know why we're here. Carter's been stirring up trouble and rallying people against me because he doesn't want to follow the rules." "This isn't about Carter," Charles said firmly. "This is about you, Karen. We've reviewed the records and it appears you've been issuing directives and fines without our consent." Care to explain? Karen's face drained of color. "What? That's absurd. I've done everything in the best interest of this community. If I hadn't enforced the rules, this place would look like a dump." "That doesn't give you the right to rewrite the bylaws," the gay-haired board member interjected. She held up a folder thick with papers. "We have documented proof of at least a dozen actions you took without approval, including the attempt to cut down Carter's trees." The crowd erupted with murmurs. A few neighbors turned to glare at Karen, clearly fed up. "This is a witch hunt," Karen said, her voice rising. "You're all letting one stubborn man and his lawyer manipulate you." "I did what none of you had the backbone to do. Keep this community in line." Dan stood, his voice calm but commanding. "What you did was illegal, trespassing, unauthorized fines, misuse of HOA funds. I have all the evidence ready to submit to the county if necessary. Do you really want this to go that far?" Karen. She turned to me, her face red with anger. This is all your fault. You and your damn trees." I leaned back unfazed. "No, Karen, this is your fault. You overstepped and now everyone sees it." Charles sighed heavily. "Karen, the board is voting to suspend your authority effective immediately, pending a full audit. Until then, you're not to issue any more directives or touch any properties." The room went quiet for a long moment, and then the neighbors started clapping. Some even stood. Karen's face twisted in fury, but she said nothing. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the hall, the sound of her heels echoing like gunshots against the floor. I turned to Dan, who gave me a satisfied grin. "That's the beginning of the end for her," he said. The Rangers clapped me on the back as we left. "Looks like your land and those trees are safe," one of them said. "For now," I replied. But deep down, I knew Karen's pride wouldn't let her walk away quietly. She'd find another way to fight, and I'd be ready for it. The morning after the board meeting, the ranch felt different. For the first time in weeks, there was a quiet sense of relief hanging in the air. The Rangers were packing up their gear, preparing to leave after days of training on my land. But they moved with easy smiles and lighter steps. The battle with Karen had brought us closer than I ever expected. I stood by the oak grove, running my hand over the rough bark of the largest tree. It felt like the land itself was breathing easier now. The sun filtered through the branches, the light painting streaks of gold across the ground. These trees had stood for more than a century, weathering storms and droughts. Now they had survived Karen's crusade, too. Dan stopped by just after breakfast, his briefcase tucked under his arm. "Thought you'd want to hear this," he said with a grin. "The board held a closed-door session late last night. Karen's been officially removed as HOA president. They're conducting a full audit of all her past actions, and some of the neighbors are considering pressing charges for the fines she pocketed." I let out a slow breath, feeling tension ease out of my shoulders. "So it's over for her." "Maybe not," Dan said. "But for you, yeah, it's over. The board has no claim on your property. You're free and clear. Your trees are safe. I turned and looked out across my land. The rolling hills, the distant fence lines, the oak trees swaying slightly in the breeze. It wasn't just about the trees anymore. It was about standing my ground, about proving that no one, not even someone like Karen, could bully me into submission. The rangers gathered near their trucks, ready to say their goodbyes. The lead ranger shook my hand, his grip firm. You handled this with more grit than a lot of folks would have had. You stood up for what was yours, and you didn't back down. That's the kind of fight we respect. I smiled, feeling the weight of his words. Couldn't have done it without you guys. You were the wall I needed when she came charging in. He chuckled. Glad we could help. And if she ever tries something like this again, you've got our number. As the Rangers drove off, their trucks leaving a trail of dust, I stood alone for a moment, taking in the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from fear or tension. It was the peaceful kind, the sound of home being exactly as it should be. Later that afternoon, I walked into town to grab supplies. A few neighbors stopped me, shaking my hand and offering quiet words of support. You did the right thing, one man said. Karen had it coming. Someone needed to stand up to her. Another neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, patted my arm. Your father would have been proud of you, she said, her eyes soft. Those trees mean something to all of us, not just you. That hit me harder than I expected. I thought of my father. Of all the times he'd told me, land isn't just dirt and trees. It's who you are. If you don't protect it, you'll lose more than property. You'll lose yourself. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills and the last rays lit up the oak grove, I sat on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee. The battle was over, but the lesson stayed with me. Standing up for what's right isn't always easy, and sometimes it feels like the world is against you. But when you hold your ground, when you refuse to be pushed around, people notice. They stand with you. I glanced toward the road where Karen's SUV had once sat, kicking up dust. She was gone now. Maybe for good. Maybe just regrouping somewhere else. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I had the law, the truth, and my own stubborn resolve on my side. I raised my mug toward the oak grove, almost like a silent toast. We did it, I said quietly. You're not going anywhere. The branches swayed gently in the wind, as if agreeing with me. That night I realized this fight wasn't just about trees or bylaws. It was about standing up for what matters, no matter how small it seems. If someone like Karen ever shows up at your door trying to push you around, don't be afraid to dig your heels in. You might be surprised how many people will stand beside you when you do. If this story struck a chord with you, take a moment to share your own thoughts below. What would you have done in my place? And if you enjoy hearing stories where justice wins out in the end, don't forget to subscribe and join me for the next tale from the ranch.